Aliens begged for help, but humanity answered instead. The galaxy was burning. Stars that once gave life now looked down on ruined worlds, their light shining on broken cities and shattered fleets. Entire civilizations that had ruled for thousands of years were falling in days, and the enemy moved like an endless storm. They called them the Swarm. No one knew from where they came, no one knew what they truly wanted. All that was certain was their hunger, their numbers, and their cruelty. World after world screamed, and those screams went silent in fire. The great alien empires had tried to stand against them. They had built war fleets of shining crystal, of living metal, of ancient technology older than their suns. They had sent billions of soldiers, machines, and weapons into battle. But the Swarm was not an enemy that could be reasoned with. They did not stop. They did not retreat. They did not speak. They consumed. And in their shadow, even the most powerful star nations were nothing. The Council of the Nine, the oldest alliance in the galaxy, gathered in secret chambers as their maps bled red with lost worlds. Proud kings, wise scholars, and generals of entire species sat together, their voices trembling. Never before had they begged. Never before had they admitted fear. But now they faced the end of all things. They sent a signal into the void, a call carried on every frequency in every tongue across the stars. It was not a message of command, not even of diplomacy. It was a plea. Help us or we are lost. They waited. Days passed, then weeks. The stars gave no answer. Civilizations that had once been their rivals turned silent, destroyed before they could even think of responding. No empire was strong enough. No power was willing. The signal traveled further and further, out into the dark corners of the galaxy, reaching places the Council had never bothered to notice before. For in their pride, the Council had believed they were the center of all life. But the signal reached further still. It touched a system at the edge of a spiral arm, a system known by few. There, around a yellow star, circled a world that many called cursed, a death world. It was a place where storms raged across oceans, where predators ruled jungles, where mountains split the skies with fire. The Council had records of it, long ignored, a world too violent to birth a civilized race. Yet from that world the signal did not fall into silence. It was heard, and it was answered. The envoys of the Council did not believe it at first. They thought the translation machines were broken, that the words were a mistake. But no, it was true. The Deathworlders, the humans of Earth, had heard their desperate cry, and to the shock of the galaxy they had replied. The aliens remembered stories of Earth, half-myths told in whispers. They said humans had climbed to power by fighting everything their own planet threw at them. Disease, predators, storms, even themselves. They were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most intelligent, but they were stubborn. They refused to die. To the Council they were dangerous, unpredictable, a species best left alone. And yet now, at the end of all things, it was this species that spoke. The Council's chambers filled with noise when the reply came through. "We heard your call," the humans said in voices calm, too calm for such a dark time. "We will come." The councilors stared in disbelief. Come? How could such a primitive people hope to stand against the Swarm, when even the greatest empires had fallen? Humanity was nothing compared to them. A race of Deathworld survivors still climbing into the stars. They had fleets, yes, but small fleets, fragile compared to the armadas that had already been destroyed. It made no sense. Why would they even try? But as the envoys of the council prepared to reject the offer, to tell the humans they would only be in the way, something strange happened. Across the chamber, among the alien lords and queens, a silence grew. Not a silence of despair, but of realization. Perhaps this was why no one else had answered. The old powers had grown soft, relying on ancient technology and old victories. But these humans had been forged in danger every day of their existence. They were not shielded by peaceful worlds or safe skies. They lived always on the edge of death, and they had learned to fight back. The humans did not speak with pride. They did not boast of victory or demand tribute. Their answer was simple, direct, almost cold. We will come. It was not a promise of glory. It was not a speech of hope. It was a fact. The council looked at one another, their fear deepening in a new way. Perhaps this was not salvation. Perhaps this was something even more terrifying. To call upon humanity was to call upon predators dressed as people, a force that did not stop, did not forgive, did not forget, and yet they had no choice. The Swarm would not wait. The stars were burning, and the Deathworlders had answered. As the alien envoys set their course for Earth, they could not shake the question that echoed in their minds. What kind of species would choose to fight when all others ran? What kind of beings would hear a desperate signal and come anyway? And in the darkness between the stars, the humans prepared. The envoys expected Earth to refuse. They expected humans to laugh, to close their doors, or to demand impossible payment. Why should a young race risk their future for strangers across the stars? Why should they fight a war that even the greatest empires had lost? Yet when the council ships reached the Sol system, what they found was not laughter, not fear, but silence. Humanity listened. Humanity studied. And then humanity decided. On Earth, the leaders gathered. They came not from one nation, not from one flag, but from all corners of the world. Old enemies sat side by side, their disputes forgotten in the face of something far greater. The swarm was not a problem for aliens alone. The swarm was a shadow that would one day reach Earth too, and humans had always been creatures who looked ahead to the storm before it came. They had always been planners, builders, survivors. The council envoys stood in a great chamber in Geneva, watching as humans filled the room. Generals, admirals, scientists, even simple men and women who represented voices of the people. The aliens felt the weight of the atmosphere press upon them. These humans did not act like a weak race. They did not kneel or beg. They stood tall, eyes sharp like hunters circling a wounded beast. The aliens spoke first, their voices trembling. They told of planets burning, of empires broken, of countless lives lost. They spoke of the swarm, of battles fought and failed, of despair. They ended with their plea, "We beg you, help us. Even if it is hopeless, help us." The chamber was silent. For a long moment, no human spoke. The envoys wondered if perhaps their words had fallen into emptiness. Then a single voice broke the stillness. "We know hopelessness," a woman said. She was old, her hair white, her uniform filled with scars and medals. "Our history is written with it. But we also know survival." Another voice joined her. "We fought wars on our own world that nearly ended us, yet we endured." Another. "We built machines to carry us through fire and storms. We tamed seas, skies, even space itself. We are still here because we never stopped fighting." The council envoys looked into the faces around them. They saw not arrogance, not pity, but something far colder. Resolve. Humanity had already decided. The answer was spoken clearly. "We will not watch the galaxy burn. If the swarm comes for you today, it will come for us tomorrow. So we will fight. Not for conquest, not for power, but because survival is what we are." The envoys trembled. This was not the answer they had expected. And yet it was the only answer that mattered. Humanity would fight. Word spread across Earth like wildfire. Soldiers volunteered in the millions. Engineers worked day and night. Shipyards glowed as new fleets rose into the skies. Humanity had always built weapons for their own wars, but now they built for a greater one. The aliens watched in disbelief. Their own empires had taken centuries to raise fleets of war. But these humans moved with speed and fury. They poured their will into steel and fire as if every moment was precious. And perhaps it was. The swarm was already moving, consuming more stars every day. Across Earth, strange sights appeared. New weapons tested on oceans and deserts. Machines built with alien knowledge combined with human creativity. Where other species followed old patterns, humans improvised. They changed designs overnight. They made tools from scraps. They turned weakness into strength. The envoys realized the truth. Humans were not the most advanced, but they were the most adaptable. Yet there was something deeper still. The aliens noticed how the humans looked at the stars, not with fear, but with hunger. Not for conquest, but for challenge. It was as if the war itself had awakened something buried in them, something their death world had planted long ago. At last, the day came when the first human fleets stood ready. Great carriers that blotted out the sky, destroyers lined with weapons that pulsed like thunder, soldiers in armor black as night. The aliens stared in awe. They had begged for help, and humanity had answered with power beyond anything they had imagined. But still, whispers moved through the council envoys. Could it be true? Could these humans, these Deathworlders, succeed where all others had failed? Or were they only marching into their own destruction? When the fleets prepared to leave, the humans sent one final message. It was not filled with speeches, not filled with promises. It was a simple broadcast sent across the galaxy. "We have decided. We are coming." The words echoed in every alien world, in every frightened heart. The Deathworlders were on the move. And for the first time since the war began, the galaxy felt something it had almost forgotten. Not fear, not despair, but hope. The human fleets left Earth like a storm rising from the ocean. Carriers, cruisers, and destroyers cut across the stars, black hulls gleaming with new weapons. To the alien envoys, it felt impossible. How could a young race build so much so quickly? Yet here they were, flying toward the front lines where countless empires had already fallen. The swarm had never been stopped, never even slowed. Now the galaxy would see if Deathworlders could do what no one else could. The first meeting happened on the edge of a dying system. Once it had been home to a proud species of builders. Now its planets were ash and dust, its cities torn apart. In the distance, the swarm moved, shadows blotting out the light of the star. The aliens trembled at the sight, but the humans looked at it the way wolves looked at prey. The order was given. Engage. From the lead human carrier, thousands of fighters swarmed into space. They moved with speed the aliens had never seen, weaving between living war beasts and organic ships that screamed as they attacked. Where alien fleets had once panicked, humans stayed calm. Their voices over the comms were cold, clipped, precise. Squadron 7 cut the flank. Target the hive ship's eyes. Blind it. Keep firing. Do not stop. The aliens watched from the command decks of their own ships, stunned. They had fought the swarm for years, yet the humans fought them like they were familiar, like they had been preparing for this war all along. The swarm roared back. Massive organic vessels, larger than cities, opened with mouths of fire, vomiting acid and plasma. They struck the human fleets, tearing ships apart, scattering debris. The aliens gasped, certain humanity would break, but the humans did not retreat. Where one ship fell, two more surged forward. Where weapons failed, soldiers rammed engines into enemy flesh, turning their deaths into fire. In one brutal clash, a human destroyer was torn open. Instead of fleeing, its crew armed every reactor, steering the dying ship into the heart of a swarm beast. The explosion ripped through the void, tearing dozens of enemies apart. The aliens whispered in horror and in awe. These humans were not soldiers. They were predators. The battle raged for hours. The aliens had expected humanity to fail, to be crushed like all before them. Instead, they saw something they had never imagined. The swarm was slowing. For the first time in recorded history, the endless tide was not advancing. It was holding back. On the bridge of the lead carrier, Admiral Reyes stood tall. Her voice was calm as she gave orders, her eyes unflinching even as entire fleets burned. Push them. Break their lines. Show them what it means to hunt. And humanity obeyed. The aliens could not understand it. They had always seen war as numbers, as strategies written in code. But humanity fought with something else. They fought with fury, with imagination, with a refusal to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. They turned desperation into weapons, chaos into order. One alien envoy whispered, trembling, "They are not fighting to win. They are fighting to kill." By the end of the battle, the system was unrecognizable. Swarm corpses floated across the void, burned and broken. Human ships too were shattered, their wreckage shining like falling stars. But the impossible had happened. The swarm had been forced to retreat. It had not been destroyed, but it had been stopped. And that had never happened before. The alien envoys could hardly believe it. They sent messages back to the council. The humans fight like no other. They bleed, they burn, but they do not break. The swarm has met its match. But in the human fleets there was no celebration. On every ship, names of the dead were read aloud. Soldiers saluted the void, their faces grim. They had won, but they knew it was only the beginning. The swarm would come back stronger, angrier, hungrier. Humanity had taken its first step into a war that would not end quickly. Still, whispers spread across the galaxy. Civilizations that had already given up began to hope again. They spoke of the humans, the Deathworlders who had stood where no one else could. They spoke of black ships that fought like predators, of soldiers who refused to die quietly. And somewhere deep in the void, the swarm itself seemed to stir. For the first time, the enemy had been hurt. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. The humans had shown the galaxy something it had never seen before. They had shown that the swarm could bleed. The galaxy whispered of victory, but the humans knew better. They had forced the swarm to retreat, yes, but it was not defeat. It was only the first cut against a monster that spanned the stars. And monsters bled slowly. The fleets pressed forward, moving deeper into alien space, reclaiming ruined systems. Behind them, survivors emerged from hiding, their eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in years, they saw hope, Ships with human flags patrolling their skies, soldiers landing not as conquerors but as guardians. They bowed, they wept, they offered what little they had. The humans accepted nothing. Keep it, they said. You will need it for what comes next. But every victory carried a heavy price. Human ships returned scarred, their hulls torn open, their decks filled with the silence of the fallen. Entire crews vanished into fire, names read over comms and voices that did not tremble, though hearts did. Humanity had entered the war with fury, but now they began to learn its cost. The aliens watched in awe and in fear. No other species fought like this. When their own soldiers fell, armies broke apart, leaders surrendered, worlds begged for mercy. But the humans, when one ship fell, others surged forward. When a squad was lost, the next charged harder. They did not fight as if they wanted to live. They fought as if they refused to let anyone else die in vain. Stories spread. A human frigate, surrounded and crippled, boarded by swarm creatures, fought for 7 hours in total darkness. The crew sealed themselves into hallways, turning every corridor into a last stand. When their weapons ran out, they used blades, pipes, even their own fists. When the fleet finally reached them, not one swarm beast was alive, but neither was most of the crew. Their captain's final log was short. We held. That is all that matters. Another tale spoke of Marines who boarded a swarm hive ship, their armor glowing with fire as they carved through tunnels of living flesh. Communications caught their last words before silence. If we do not return, burn this thing to ash. The explosion that followed lit an entire sector like a false sunrise. The aliens could not understand it. They asked the humans why they would fight like this, why they would throw away their lives so easily. One human answered simply, because someone has to. And yet the cracks began to show. On Earth, families received news of loved ones lost in battles light years away. In alien stations, humans sat in silence, staring at the stars, their eyes carrying ghosts. They grieved, but they did not stop. They built more ships, trained more soldiers, and returned to the void. Admiral Reyes stood at the center of it all, her voice steady, her orders clear. But even she carried the weight of the fallen. Her fleet logs filled with names, her nights haunted by faces. Still, she stood tall before her people, for she knew what they needed. Humanity had chosen this path. There was no turning back. The swarm, too, had begun to change. Their attacks grew fiercer, their strategies less predictable. It was as if they had learned from their first encounter with the Deathworlders. Larger hive ships appeared. Swarms doubled in number. New horrors emerged from the void. Humanity answered each one with fire, but the cost rose higher with every battle. The Council of the Nine watched from afar, their fear shifting into something else. Admiration, yes, but also dread. They had unleashed humanity upon the galaxy, and humanity was not just fighting the swarm, they were reshaping the war itself. The galaxy had once accepted despair, now it burned with defiance, and it was humanity's fire that lit it. But whispers grew. Could this fire consume more than the enemy? Could it one day burn the galaxy itself? For if humans were willing to bleed this much for others, what would they do if the war ever turned against them? Yet for now all doubts were buried under necessity. The swarm was endless. The humans were the only wall between survival and extinction. And though the wall cracked, it still stood. One night, in the silence of space, a young alien officer asked a human marine a question that many had feared to voice aloud. Why do you keep fighting when the cost is so high? When even your victories look like defeat? The human smiled, tired but unbroken. Because that's what we do. We fight, we endure, we survive, and if we must fall, we make sure the enemy falls harder. The officer said nothing more. He realized then that he was not speaking to ordinary soldiers. He was speaking to creatures born of a world that killed the weak and hardened the strong, a world that had shaped them into Deathworlders. And in the dark between stars, where the wreckage of ships drifted like bones, the war raged on. The cost grew heavier, but humanity carried it without breaking, for they had decided long ago that survival was never free. The war reached its darkest hour. Humanity had fought battle after battle, each one leaving scars on their fleets and their souls. The swarm was relentless, pouring across the stars like a tide of living fire. Whole sectors had become graveyards, littered with wrecks of both alien and human ships. The galaxy watched in silence, waiting to see if even the Deathworlders could endure the storm forever. The final push came without warning. Scouts reported a vast gathering of the swarm, a force greater than anything yet seen, hive ships the size of moons, countless swarms of living war beasts, a tide that blotted out sensors with its sheer scale. At the center of it all was something new, the heart of the swarm, a massive organism pulsing with energy, feeding power to the endless horde. If it was not destroyed, the galaxy was lost. Admiral Reyes stood on the command deck of the human flagship, her face lit by the glow of tactical screens. Around her, officers worked in silence, their voices sharp, their hands steady. She knew what this battle meant. She knew what it would cost. And yet there was no hesitation in her voice when she gave the order. All fleets, advance. The humans moved first. Waves of fighters launched into the black, cutting through the endless swarm like knives. Cruisers opened fire with weapons that thundered across the void, tearing holes in the living tide. Carriers deployed wave after wave, refusing to slow, refusing to stop. The aliens who fought beside them watched in awe. It was madness, it was suicide, and yet the humans pressed forward. The swarm struck back with fury. Ships were torn apart. Their screams carried through the comms before silence claimed them. Entire squadrons vanished into explosions. Still, the humans did not retreat. They carved a path mile by mile through endless death. Every ship lost only pushed the rest harder. At the heart of the chaos, the flagship took the lead. Admiral Reyes stood like a shadow against the light of burning stars. "Target the heart," she ordered. Her voice was calm, steady, unbroken. No matter the cost. The aliens heard the order and could hardly believe it. No matter the cost? Already thousands of humans had fallen, their fleets burning across the void. But then they understood. This was not about survival for humanity alone. This was about survival for all. And if humanity had to burn themselves to ash to save the galaxy, they would. The humans drove deeper, their ships breaking, their numbers thinning. One by one, captains sacrificed themselves, turning dying vessels into weapons. Carriers rammed hive ships, detonating their cores in bursts of fire. Frigates overloaded their reactors, tearing massive holes in the swarm tide. Every death was a message. Every sacrifice was a declaration. Finally, the flagship reached the heart. It was vast, a monstrous creature of flesh and bone, glowing with a sick light. It pulsed like a star, its energy flooding the horde. The humans knew they had one chance. "Arm the cores," Reyes said softly. Around her, officers froze, but only for a moment. Then they nodded. They understood. The flagship's reactors began to overload. Warnings flashed red across every screen. The crew worked without panic, their faces calm. They knew they would not return, but they also knew what their deaths would mean. Reyes sent one final message across all channels, human and alien alike. Her voice carried through every ship, every station, every world still alive. "We came because you asked for help. We stayed because we knew what it meant to give it. Remember this. Humanity fights not for glory, not for conquest, but because no one else would. We will not let the galaxy burn." The message ended, and then the flagship plunged into the heart of the swarm. The explosion lit the void like a newborn star. The heart screamed as it was torn apart, its energy unraveling. Across the battlefield, the swarm faltered, their endless tide collapsing into chaos. Hive ships convulsed and died. Beasts turned to ash, the tide broke. For the first time, the galaxy was free. When the light faded, silence filled the stars. The human flagship was gone. So were thousands of others. The cost was beyond measure. But the galaxy lived. The aliens stood in awe. They had begged for help, and humanity had answered. They had not answered with words or with promises, but with blood and fire. They had given everything, even their lives, so others might survive. In the years that followed, monuments rose on alien worlds, not to their own fallen, but to the humans who had come from a death world and saved them all. The galaxy spoke of them in whispers, in legends, and prayers. They spoke of a species that had no reason to fight, yet fought anyway. A species that did not turn away when all others had. And always the final words of Admiral Reyes remained, carried across the stars like a vow. We will not let the galaxy burn. Humanity had given its answer, and the galaxy would never forget it.